The older I get, the more I want to push against that stuff and be as fully wild as I naturally am. And that's pretty wild.
What? If you watch your TikTok, you'll understand why she just
meow a
meowed.
lot. I don't know.
But this is exactly why we're doing this podcast together, because you just, in very short order, in that last bit, knocked down about 3 or 4 myths. These are all myths that need to be
You
done.
want to say what they are? Because I'm knocking down myths and I don't even notice I'm knocking them down.
The appearance myth, the go along to get along myth, how institutions work versus how they should work. Hi, I'm PJ Manney. Welcome to Love Letters to the Future, and I'm here with my co-host Laura Faye Tenenbaum. This show is about the stories that no longer serve us, the new stories we need to write, and that's something we call the new mythos. Last episode, we discussed why I came up with this podcast, what the new mythos was, and how we can all move forward to tell better stories and create a better future. This episode, we're going to meet Laura, and we're going to find out why she's so fabulous, why she agrees that we need better stories, and how we can all work together to make a better future.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here and doing this with you. I really sincerely am.
It's wonderful. So I want to approach this from the full person idea, because so many times when we both are on podcasts, we present a sliver of ourselves because the host expects that sliver, the audience expects that sliver. They've come to hear you about the climate crisis, or they've come to hear you about sustainability. But that's not just all you are. And as the years have gone on in your own communications journey, you've become this very broad, full spectrum human being. So I want to get to the origin story of Laura Faye Tenenbaum before we get into the details. What made you want to tell stories, and what are you doing here?
Sure. I mean, I think the original origin story comes out of like when I was a young girl just wanting to be pretty. And, you know, I guess, is that every young girl's thing?
That's
Maybe
so
it's
relatable.
what society tells you. And, you know, I was taught to believe by society, family members, teachers, that you had to pick between smart or pretty.
Yeah, amen.
And you could not have both. You had to pick. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in different situations with women who have said the same thing. Maybe they picked pretty and they dumbed themselves down. I can name names. You're nodding because I know you're thinking of the same person that I am. And then other women who one of my really good friends at NASA is a brilliant physicist. And she says stuff like, oh, I don't know how to use a blow dryer. And I'm like, girl, you're a physicist. You could fucking figure it out. But there's a thing in the science community where we dismiss, beauty because it means that you're stupid. So there's this beauty brain split. And I think men probably have it too, their own version of it. So men out there listening, I'm not cutting you off. And I have resisted that since as far back as I can remember. And it really came to a peak. I taught college oceanography for 13 years. And I mostly taught freshmen who were fulfilling the breadth requirement. And they actually told me, they're like, well, we thought oceanography, of the physical sciences would suck the least, right? So that's why they're in my class. But I had a different agenda for them. I wanted them to be science literate citizens and love science. By the time they walked in, kind of going, get me out of here, make this as easy as possible. And I wanted them to walk out, not necessarily needing to pursue a university degree or become a research scientist, but at least understanding science, appreciating sciences, and having a lifelong love of science. So I realized very quickly that I could get my message to them better if I listened first, right? So I listened to where they were at first. And I actually have recorded this. I turned a camera on them and recorded them saying what their impression of a scientist was. And it was a man who sat alone in the room wearing a lab coat with no social skills, never got laid, so no game, no friends, no personality. That was the stereotype. And it still is if you go and ask people what they think a scientist is. It's a loner. So then when I got to NASA and I started turning the camera around on scientists, I'd literally be in a room with the scientist or research scientists, because we're all scientists, right? So I want to dispel that notion that there's two groups of people, science people and non-science people. If you're born as a human, your brain is curious about how the world works, which means you're a scientist. Anyway, so I'm turning the camera around on people who have chosen to do research as a profession, and we're talking and we're fine, and as soon as I push record, they stiffen up and become this like weird, condescending caricature robot person. There's probably a lot of complex reasons why each individual muffled themselves. Some of it is improper training. Some of it is intimidation. Some of it is an idea that they have in their head about what formality. I realized at that point, because I also live walking distance from Warner, Universal Studios, Disney, Cartoon Network. I mean, literally, I live in the media capital of the world. And my neighbors, like, are artists, musicians, cartoonists, voiceoverists, actors, stage designers. Literally every single person in my neighborhood works in the industry. So here we have like all this access to all the ways that we deliver information. And in the science community, we weren't using it, right? So like, think about a student, and I'm talking about like elementary school, middle school, high school, college, and all the way up, right? If you're watching TV, now it's streaming series or the phone, you're having every kind of high-tech graphic, all kinds of really interesting stuff, even like a TV commercial, you know, great clothes, great music, choreography, sets, and then you go into like science content, and none of that is there. There's no packaging. There's no delivery. And the science community was actually against packaging. But yet they're not listening to the audience. And certainly in, you know, this podcast, we were talking about narrative storytelling. So humans, the way the brain works is we're wired for telling stories, right? A story, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Or, you know, some kind of thing where you've got a protagonist that the audience identifies with. I mean, we've known this since Elizabethan times, you know, or
the Greeks.
Earlier. The Greeks, yes. So there's a protagonist that the audience identifies with, and then you feel what they feel, and then you get involved with the story. I mean, there was a thing called the Scully effect.
Oh my God.
Do you know what that is?
Yes, I totally know what that is. It's so fascinating.
Explain it for everybody.
So you had Mulder and Scully in the X-Files.
Which was a TV show in the 90s, 2000s. You could probably stream it now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very popular.
Not only very popular, but it's having a big resurgence right now, which is super cool. But so Scully was the scientist of this pair of paranormal detectives, so to speak, on the X-Files. And she
wore
was a
like
scientist.
Pencil skirts, and she had like, I mean, not like
She was
sexy
coiffed,
anything, but she
was
had
coiffed. She had good hair. She had good makeup. She
heels,
was
wore
right.
heels. She had
was
sexuality, sex appeal.
She was feminine, sexy, smart as all get out, and represented the science on the show. So suddenly all these young girls thought, well, hold on a second. I'm smart. I've got brains, and I'm not bad to look at. I want to be a scientist.
There was a flood of women entering the educational system who were majoring in scientific fields. So what Hollywood did was literally take, you know, we had Doc from Back to the Future, you know, frizzy haired, kind of kooky. You know, people think scientists, what my students told me was that people think scientists are wacky and fun and really smart, but also nerdy. And when I would talk to my students, they never could see themselves in that role. I'm not saying that people should have like facelifts and do the whole, you know, plastic surgery and stuff like that, but a little bit, just the smallest bit of like grooming could make a big difference in showing respect for your audience. And when you show respect for your audience, they show respect back to you. And when you condescend to your audience by saying, I don't even need to try for you, they say, well, fuck you. So I started working at NASA in 2007, and it was right the end of the George Bush era. He was saying climate change isn't real, or it's, maybe made up, or we're not sure. We need to do more studies. And certainly by then we'd done many studies. We needed to act. Decades before then. But a lot of it was people not taking scientists seriously and dismissing them because they felt that scientists were like in their ivory towers, aloof and condescending, and they made people who were listening feel stupid, and the last thing that people want to feel is stupid. And of course that was in 2007, and it's only gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. So you see this there's an abject rejection of science now. And I think, I cannot control every aspect of why science has been and continues to be rejected in our society. What I can control is the way the scientists present our information. Can we present it in a way that the audience feels more included? Can we present it in a way? So my students told me they wanted fun. They wanted to see people interacting on camera. And, young people of all ages love dress up. They love costumes. So they wanted to see people wearing fun stuff. Most of my ideas I got just from being in the classroom and listening to what people want, and then being in my neighborhood and listening to what people were playing around with. And I'm not talking about studio executives. I'm talking about real creatives who were doing indie creative wacky stuff.
That's amazing.
I have a story if you want to hear it.
I would love to hear your story.
So I'm at, I think it was the Astronomical Society conference. Mm-hmm. It was not a big conference, a couple hundred people. It was really fun, very interesting. And there was a speech on science communication. And so there's 100 people sitting in this room, and it was a man, and he had the slides, you see the slides, and one of his main slides was blue, solid blue, with a whole bunch of white writing. And I was sitting near the back. I know, you're laughing already. I took a photo of it, so maybe I will put it somewhere so people can see it. So I'm sitting in the back, and I couldn't even read it, right? And so I'm how when you're at a boring meeting, you look on your phone. So I'm texting with my husband, who works in the entertainment industry, and he texts me a photo of where he is. He was working on a Ellie Goulding music video, and he's like, here's the set, right? And so it's not in the music video, it's a close-up, but the whole set you can see. So there's a car, a VW bug floating from a cloud, and you can see the other stunt guy kind of doing work in the cloud, and the set is purple and pink, and she's in this gown, and it's stunning. It's beautiful. And I'm I cannot believe the contrast between this man. We have, as a science community, and arguably the most interesting topics. We also have really interesting people. But what we do is we take the most interesting topics and the most interesting people, but somehow we transform them to make them so incredibly boring, nobody wants to have access to it. And yet somehow, literally in our backyard, we have a bunch of creatives who would love to express their skills in that reality, and the two of them haven't been able to merge in a way that I found satisfying. And while I worked at NASA, I kept trying to kind of, let's do this a little bit more creatively, let's add a little bit of humor, let's be more real, because all the students were telling me, we don't want to be talked down to, just relate it to everyday life, be human, we want to see groups. Certainly if you don't want the stereotype that scientists are loners, put more than one of them on camera at a time, for example.
Exactly.
But yeah, it didn't work. I was unable to pull the telephone pole out of NASA's ass, no matter how hard I tried. So I did fail at that.
I vividly remember, speaking of your attempts to bring entertainment and communication skills to NASA. So one of our first times we ever worked together was many years ago at NASA.
I brought you there,
You brought me and our friend Karen Austin, who people will see eventually on this series as well, who is a famous acting coach.
I was teaching a group of postdoctoral students who were working at NASA for the summer. So a postdoc is somebody who's got their PhD, but they don't yet have their own lab. So they move around working at other labs. So a bunch of postdocs who wanted to be able to communicate about their science. So I was teaching, I don't remember, like a 4-month communication course, and so I brought PJ and Karen to help
basically shake them up and explain to them that who they are as human beings is integral to their ability to communicate science, and that's the thing I find.
They weren't having it.
Not having it at all.
Any of it.
They weren't having it at all, and I found that so fascinating because here you are, you're at a conference, right, and you're bored out of your mind, and this guy can't communicate. Why does every scientist think they're the only one who's bored in that audience? They're all bored. They could not give
but
they're
used to being bored. They climb in their own box, and that's part of that's an answer to the very original question that you asked me, when did this all start? I mean, I don't know what caused me to be unboxable. But people my whole life have been trying to shove me in a damn box. And I'm always like, I don't fit in that box. I don't fit in the box that you want to put me in. So no matter what I've done, I've always just been like, but other people seem to be like, oh, my little box, let me stay inside. It's so comfortable. So that seemed to be what was happening with the science community. And I'll just add one thing. If a person has spent decades, maybe multiple decades, working on research, they shouldn't have to be good at communicating. Like, we're all different. We all have different skills, right? If they want to learn communication, of course, these are smart people. They could learn it, right? But they shouldn't have to. And I think that's part of the problem. Like, the media doesn't want the science communicator. They want the person who's doing the actual research, even though the person who's doing the actual research spent 20 years doing the research and 5 minutes learning speaking skills. So I've been advocating for a legitimate position of science communicator. I tried at USC to get a minor in it. So for example, if you want a regular liberal arts degree, right, you have to take one science class to get your degree. But if you want to have a science degree, like a bachelor's or then a master's or then a PhD, how many communication classes do you need? The answer is 0. You need 0. So I thought maybe there could be a major or at least a minor where you would have a science degree with a minor in communication for those people. And there are some classes. There's Alan Alda Center for Science Communication, and then there's another one in Chicago at Northwestern. But the problem is they are 1 unit offered evening classes. So even the school itself doesn't consider it important enough to give it a proper 3 units and put it in daytime. So yes, you can come take the silly little fun communication class for an elective 1 unit at 6 p.m. at night and fuck around. I don't know the answer yet. I'm still trying.
What I think is so extraordinary is that I appreciate that there are people for whom communication is not a mental strength. However, if people think that their work is important and they do not learn how to communicate, they don't understand that no one will get to know about their work. The most important part of that is you knowing why it's important to you. Why is it important to you?
To the person who's doing the research.
Why should I care?
Now, that is the question. If a tree falls in a forest, does it matter if nobody hears it? That's kind of the ultimate question about scientific research. And I know researchers who aren't bothered if the world knows about what they're doing. When it comes to climate change, for example, it's really important to know. I think there's some people who are looking at esoteric things that are maybe deep in the understanding of I don't know, an ion in the sun or something and what it's doing. And it may not have, understanding that doesn't have impact on human lives, right? But it's like super interesting for those people, and they're very curious about that. And so they're not driven to necessarily communicate. I mean, I can't tell you how many times at NASA I heard this is how things are done around here.
Oh my God.
I mean, maybe that's like myth number one. This is how things are done around here, and because it was done before, then we have to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Even though time changes and that practice is no longer effective. I mean, this is the biggest issue, I think, with science communication in general. This isn't 1965. We don't look at a guy in a white coat, or listen to Wernher von Braun and assume, oh, well, they're the authority, they're the expert, we're going to believe everything they say. The world has become far more fragmented and complex, and there are people who are willing, and I don't say this is a good thing, willing to say, well, I don't believe in science. Okay, then that's up to the scientists and the science communicators to get those messages across. You can't say we can do the same old thing we were doing before. You have to adapt to your audience. And, I too am all about, you respect the audience. The audience is incredibly important because they are the consumers of the things that you are putting out there. And while I can absolutely see how researchers would be offended by the notion that they're providing information for consumers, ultimately everyone is the audience, even their own fellow scientists. Back to the class that Karen and I joined you in, I will never forget, and I repeat this story all the time, asking each person why they were here. What are you working on? Why do you care? Why should I care about what you're doing? I want it to be personal. I want you to get vulnerable, which was so uncomfortable for them. Oh my God.
Impossible for them.
But it was really interesting. That alone told so much. And then there was one of the postdocs, she was Chinese, and she worked in atmospheric research studying particulate matter in the atmosphere. And I said, why do you do what you do? And she said, I like detective stories. And I thought, no, honey, that's not why you're here. You didn't work so hard that you got to the top of the Chinese educational system, which we all know is incredibly hard, and then meant to the top of the American educational system to study particulate matter in the atmosphere unless there was something else. And there was. She later came up to me after we were all talking. There was like a very long talk period after the class when people finally started letting their guards down and coming up to both Karen and I and admitting their real truths. And she said, I come from Beijing and my friends and family are dying from air pollution. And I want to understand the science and try to help decrease pollution in the air so fewer people die.
See, that's goosebumps. It's goosebumps.
And if you began your research, your explanation of research, like this is why this research matters. This isn't just about dust in the air. This is about particulate matter that infects the lungs, that creates emphysema, that creates lung cancer, that creates brain damage, that lowers IQ, that, these are all things that we can...
Affected my own mother or something.
Right, exactly.
Talk about how much that hurt.
Every scientist in the room would light up and go, oh my God, this is so important.
But we're not taught, especially as science, researchers or people who are good at science or studied science or be attracted to science, are not, encouraged to be vulnerable by our society. And again, now we're at myth number 2, where we're separating, we're saying, these are the hard sciences. You've got to, study math and calculus. And look, I love math and calculus. I think they're fun. I think numbers are super interesting. But at the same time, it's like I can also embrace the like weird, squishy, hard shit, the humanity of it. And I'm not sure why we silo those different parts of ourselves as humans. I mean, certainly people are taught to toughen up and not show their vulnerability. But my very first speaking coach, Judy Carter, she would say stuff like, the reason that people come to see your talk is because of your resume, but the reason that people listen to your talk is because of that broken, sad story that you start with. That's why they listen.
Exactly.
And if she'd have started with the broken, vulnerable, sad story, then people start to care about you. And I can't tell you how many people I know who work in the sciences, but you don't know anything about them. What's their home like? What was their upbringing like? What was their kids like? What was, their family life like? What's their relationship with their dog? They don't tell you anything about their inner soul. So they're just, a boring talking head. The other big thing that I want to make sure that we talk about here was, like, I think I mentioned that that my students told me that they hated being talked down to. I mean, condescension is like, it's, for me, it's worse than nails at a chalkboard. But I think what happens, and you talked about that, like that, this is how things have always been done before. You were mentioning that, like, in the 1950s and 60s, somebody would come out in a white lab coat and everybody would listen. But the problem with that is when you listen to somebody speak about science, in my opinion, what normally happens is the audience member walks away thinking, oh, that person was smart. But I'd prefer for the audience member to walk away feeling, oh, I feel smarter.
Exactly.
I want the audience to feel smarter instead of the audience feels stupid. So I had an idea of writing a book originally, and it was going to be called "I'm Smart, You're Stupid." So maybe that should be an article. It's a funny article, but I mean that's the whole kind of vibe, and I believe that comes from, like, getting the gold star starting in 3rd grade on your paper, so you're constantly being rewarded for your intellect, and it just becomes kind of a dopamine habit to, like, brag about how fucking smart you are. But you can brag about how smart you are, but then you never have connection.
Right. That's exactly right.
So you're very smart and very lonely, and then you keep bragging because you're so lonely to get more attention, but it keeps you pushed away and lonelier. So it's better to be connected and to uplift the other people so that we can all feel smart together, rather than living in a society where everybody hates the smart people because they're condescending assholes. Which is where we're at now.
Absolutely. And I'd actually like to, because I often bring this up, and, I know you get a little uncomfortable when I do bring it up, but it's something I think that really needs to be addressed. And that is the amount of neurodivergence in the sciences. And for a lot of those people, they're rewarded because what they can be really good at is the focused, no mental break kind of research, but they're not very good at communication skills. That sense of connection is something that, instead of saying, okay, we accept that you are very good at research, but we also do need you to learn something, except that your default behavior is not going to connect with other people. That there is a place for educating people who are on the spectrum or who have other neurodivergences, or have them accept that someone has to be their translator, someone has to be their communicator, to get that meeting between the public, your funders. I mean, that's the other one I found so fascinating. It's not, you have to the funders are often people who don't have science degrees. They're people you have to get to care.
United States government,
right,
which is everybody, all of us. Well, okay, so let me just respond to that. This is your area of expertise. I actually don't know anything about it. So if you want to kind of talk about the neurodivergent community and support for the neurodivergent community, I'm more of a listener of that. But what I will say is I think it's a problem that science has, let's just call them nerds. Okay, if that's okay by you. I don't know if that's criticism. People call them nerds. So science has attracted nerds and rewarded nerds.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And if they're celebrated, nerds and geeks are celebrated, outside and inside. It's cool to be a nerd now, whatever the hell that means. But I think, can the science community be opened to all sorts of people?
That's it.
And I think that I noticed that a lot of people who don't identify as nerds, which I don't myself identify as a nerd, and there's other people who don't, may want to be accepted into the science community. But the stereotype is that only the nerdy people get to do science. And so for your side, it's like, okay, the neurodivergent people, need support too. And I'm like, sure, cool. I don't know anything about it, but of course. But from my side, it's like, can we also, in addition to neurodivergent people who are celebrated in the sciences, encourage like all sorts of people, freaks and fun people and quirky people and circus clowns and whoever. We can all enjoy science.
I think the whole point is that you're working together. I think that you're it's asking a lot for some people with certain kinds of neurodivergences to learn how to communicate. It is really hard for some people. But I do think that's when they have to accept that there's a deficit there, that they have not built the bridge all the way across the chasm to the people who need to understand what they're doing, and they need help. And it's that lack of belief in their need for help that I think fascinating.
And I'm going to push back on this, and that's like, is it really the individuals or is it the systems that are not set up?
Both.
In general, because if every neurodivergent person has to deal with their neurodivergence and do their physical job, whatever their research is, and they have to have enough therapy to know that they need help, and they need to, it seems to me that it's more of a systems thing.
Oh no, it is a systems thing.
Where if the institutions, because most science, again, that's another myth we can blow right here, is the stereotype that a scientist is a loner.
Correct.
The scientists haven't been loners. They were in like the 1400s, literally. So the where that came from is that the only way to actually do science in like the Renaissance time was you had to either be super wealthy yourself, or you had to have some kind of benefactor who was super wealthy. Right. So all the scientists either had a benefactor or they were wealthy. So and they were probably neurodivergent back in the 1400s, kind of turn of the century back then. But then after Enlightenment, so like the 1900s, all science was done within institutions.
Yes.
Right? So like academic institutions or government institutions, or some kind of institution where there's big groups of scientists working on all kinds of research together in consort. So there was no such thing as there still is no such thing as an individual science. There's a science team. So you can have, let's say, like a lead researcher who's surrounded by associates and postdocs and colleagues and all kinds of people who work together. So the idea of a loner in a lab doesn't exist.
Isn't it interesting, though, that the examples we think of as scientists, most of them come from the 19th century or early 20th century. And they are all loners because those were the stories that were easy to tell and then celebrated, and you could have a protagonist. So it was the Curies and Darwin and Einstein and Pasteur and Semmelweis,
Da Vinci.
But these are all people in that period, that transition period where we did have institutional science.
Sir Isaac Newton.
Right, but the funny thing about Newton, I love to tell this story. So he was somebody who was absolutely on the spectrum, and the university.
Clearly.
And the university knew it, and they knew what they had as well. So the university's job was to basically take care of Newton. He lived in his little rooms.
We're talking about Sir Isaac Newton.
Sir Isaac Newton, yeah.
He came up with calculus. He came up with the Newton's laws of physics, right? The two things cannot be in the same place at the same time, is Sir Isaac Newton.
So Newton was doing all of this research in his rooms, and the university knew that they had to take care of him because otherwise he wouldn't eat, he wouldn't sleep. So they would make sure that the only people allowed to go to his rooms were servants who would make sure he was fed and watered and he was in okay health.
Fed and watered. He's a plant.
Right, basically. and then he would come out when he was done, and he would, he knew he had to do the rounds at the Royal Academy and things like that. So there was a social life involved, but not only to achieve his goals, which was to get his work into known science. But truly he lived a life very much as a loner. But those are the stories that we remember. We don't think of the institutional science, or we think about the loners because, like Semmelweis, or Pasteur, they were so against the grain They were so
Louis Pasteur, who invented penicillin.
pasteurization.
Pasteurization. Who invented penicillin?
Alexander Fleming.
Oh, right.
So, but see, this is the point. It's like, Fleming was off on his own doing his own thing, and like, oh, mold. Wait, the mold killed the bacteria.
Exactly.
So, but those are the stories that we're all taught, as opposed to the institutional science that totally existed in the 19th century and clearly beyond. But those are the myths. It's the myth of the lone scientist.
The myth of the lone scientist. Well, so let's break that myth. Show people collaborating, working in teams together. Celebrate that. When I was at NASA, I was part of a team that created content for online. Every single video was just the single talking head, talking straight to camera with the banner on the lower third and some infographics like a satellite floating around behind and just talking straight to camera. And of course they're still perpetuating that, and that was this is how we always do things here.
Exactly.
So we're perpetuating. And meanwhile, right down, in the clean room, there'd literally be like a dozen people like building the satellite.
One of the things I think is so interesting is we talk about cooperation, and I think people aren't really aware of just how big science is so cooperative. So what's possibly the single most cooperative venture in human history was the International Space Station. You had multiple governments who in theory were enemies. You had...
Yes. Oh, people ask me that all the time.
Yep.
When they're like, there's Russians on the space station. Are they stealing enemy secrets? Are they going to... blah, blah, blah? There's Chinese. I'm like, no, they're sharing their vodka and doing backflips together and whatever other research they're doing. They're probably shagging each other up there.
So the...
Hashtag article I wrote on the Slate.
Right, exactly. Sex in space. But, so you have multiple governments, and then you had all the other countries who were building things for the space station. So, like one of the jokes that everybody loves to talk about, the Canadians go, oh yeah, our space shuttle, our space station, but it's like they built the arm that goes out and reaches and grabs things and brings it back. But they, each country had different participation, different scientists. It took such a concerted effort around the world to get this thing into space and do the science on it. And we take it for granted now, like we forget what a mammoth task that was, and that we were able to accomplish it. It was hard, don't get me wrong, but surprisingly easily.
Yeah, I think that, scientists want to work together. People who are doing research science, they are not, it's the politicians who
Yes.
are pulling societies apart. The scientists themselves are thrilled to collaborate and work together, because at the end of the day, it's the actual research that people are interested in, not the fighting.
I want to make sure we cover the whole human being. So one of the things that I know about you that a lot of people don't is that you were a world-class yoga instructor to the stars. You did circus, trapeze. I mean, I look at those photos of you on the trapeze and I'm just like, holy crap.
I was such a babe. I was so
You were
hot.
such a babe. Oh my God. So I'd love to hear, like, how did you do that? How did
I
you
get from graduate school to, okay. So, yes. And people like, I will just share this with you, talking about like being in a box. I was at the, like a 3-day long like speaking conference classes where you learn, about how to improve your public speaking. It was like 100 people were taking turns getting up on the stage and, practicing some of the exercises. And at one point early on, I had introduced myself. I was still at NASA then, and I was practicing my speech that I give. I became a public speaker at NASA. And so I was the NASA lady that everybody knew. And then one morning, the instructor of this weekend, she was like, look, we had somebody who's going to give a meditation, like a little yoga shavasana meditation, and they can't come. So is anybody, so I went up and did my little spiel, close your eyes, relax your face, feel your feet grounded, that whole thing for like 4 minutes or something. People thought I was two different people. Yeah. The person who worked at NASA could not square it. So this is a question that I get all the time. It's like, how did you do both, or what's the story? So I got my degree in marine science oceanography, but I studied sea sponges. So back then, we were looking for marine natural products, so medicine from the sea. So it turns out that sea sponges, they don't really get sick. The only way they die is if like something smashes into them, right? Nobody eats them. Yeah, they
Wow.
don't get diseases. So we were, that was the cutting edge science back there. It's like marine pharmaceuticals, medicine from the sea. Sea sponges are so cool, right? It's their animal, not a plant, one of the earliest organisms, right? They have no brain, no nervous system, no digestive system, no circulatory system, and yet, like, they're so highly functional. But when I graduated, I was qualified to have a job in pharmaceuticals. And the whole time
Oh.
I was a college student, I was mountain biking and doing yoga and scuba diving, right? So I've always been super athletic. When my yoga teacher at the time had gotten like sick for a month, and I subbed the classes and I made money on the side while I was in graduate school teaching the odd yoga class every so often. So I get my degree, right? And I'm just like, getting a degree, like, really, it doesn't even get you a free Big Mac. You just got a piece of paper. So
Exactly.
I was gonna decided to just do a year abroad and travel because I wanted to travel, and so I went to India for 6 months. I was just gonna do a year abroad, and then I went to Thailand for 3 months, and I was gonna go back home. And where I'm in Thailand, I'm playing pool in some like rat infested, thing in Bangkok somewhere after scuba diving and traveling
Love
around.
it.
And somebody comes in and says, "Oh, it's World War III." And I'm like, yeah, yeah, screw you. But it turned out it was the first Gulf War, and there were like battleships and, U.S. military. And I was so ashamed of being an American. I had stopped in Hong Kong because the plane stopped in Hong Kong on the way to India. And I stayed in Hong Kong for 2 weeks, and I stayed at my friend's house. And it was this teeny, teeny, tiny little apartment. Like, literally, if you did Warrior 2, you'd like touch both sides. So I was walking around while my friend was at work, and I see this little flyer, yoga class. So I go to this yoga class at the Helena May Club in Hong Kong, and there was this really sweet lady, and she'd pick up her glasses and read the yoga pose off a paper, put her glasses down, walk forward, and do the pose for the group. Then get up, and I'm standing in the back, just happy to be able to stretch more, doing my own thing. And at the end, she comes up to me and she says, you look like you know what you're doing. And I said, "I'm Laura. I'm from California. On my way to India." And they're like, "Oh, teach me." So I guest taught while I was in Hong Kong for 2 weeks, and they gave me money. And I was like a broke college student on my way to India. And I was like, this is fun. When I was about to run out of money in Thailand and fly back to America, I got this letter, and she's like, "My husband and I are going to be out of town for 3 months. Do you want to come house sit for us and teach all my yoga classes?" And I was ashamed to go back to America because we were at the Gulf War. So I went to Hong Kong and lived there for 7 years. And that's where somebody came up to me and they were like, "You're flexible and bendy. Do you want to do shows and, be on the cover of magazines?" And so, I was like, okay. So that was fun. That was fun. But I did start to eventually miss the intellectual side. I
Yeah.
moved back to California in 97, and I had already been teaching at that point for 10 years. I was like a master teacher. I taught teacher trainings and workshops around the world, and I had students who had students. So I had grand students and great grand students by that time. And I come to LA right as yoga is like booming, right? It's launching. But there were new teachers, right? I'd done a weekend teacher training, and I've been like, well, I've been teaching for 10 years. Not I didn't say I'd been teaching for 10. You could just tell, right? I had that thing. I remember sitting at a restaurant with one of my students, and the waitress took our order and went away, and the student was like, "Do you always just see people's bodies?" And I was like, "Left knee rotated in, right shoulder pulled back." I had just like accidentally, just done this thing. So, like, my yoga was booming in California. I, bought a house from doing yoga. I was teaching studio executives and celebrities and, at the Chateau Marmont and all this kind of stuff. But I was still, like, craving that intellectual side. Toward the end, I remember I left my students in pigeon pose for 10 minutes while I was talking about, like, plankton. It's like, I needed to get back. So one day, I'm teaching Warrior 2 which now everybody, I can say that because back in when I first moved back to America,
right.
nobody knew warrior pose, dog pose. Now I can just say warrior 2 and everybody knows what it is. And I said, you want to keep your knee at a right angle, not an acute angle or an obtuse angle. And that's how I talk. Anyway, this guy stayed after class. He's like, hey, I teach physics at the local community college, and we're missing a person. There's a job opening. And I was like, so I applied. I ended up working at the college. And then from the college, there was a faculty fellowship to go work at NASA. And then I did a faculty fellowship for a summer. And then they created a position just for me. And I kept... one class a semester at the college because I just felt that listening to the students really informed the way I approached what I wanted to do at NASA. But I still kind of craved joining those two sides, and I tried to bring the joy, the fun, the playfulness, the up energy, the beauty, the art into the science world. And I succeeded somewhat, let's say. I remember blogging had just started. And so my managers wanted to do a blog. So I took this blog, and I was the first person to write from personal storytelling and with emotions.
Yes.
And like it had never been done. Fortunately, they didn't stop me. They stopped me from making video content, but they didn't stop me from writing. So I wrote with emotionality, and I connected to my readers. So emotional storytelling, I told personal stories, I talked about myself. So yeah, my blog was the most popular blog in all of NASA's, which is way more popular. And I'm talking about like we tracked, views and comments and all that kind of stuff. So that went well for a while. So it did work a little bit trying to bring the personality into the science.
So Laura, you've done some really fascinating things since leaving NASA, and I know you've been doing a lot of writing. I'd love to hear what you're doing next.
The way I left NASA, it ended badly. It ended worse than badly. 3 weeks into Trump's first term, I started being censored. I was writing about climate change, and NASA management, all the way from headquarters to my direct manager, was like, you can't do this. I was hauled into ethics. I was threatened. I was intimidated. And then I was forced out. Of course, now in the second term, it all happened within weeks. It took 7 months for them to force me out. They did say stuff like, my manager's like, well, why don't you write about Mars instead? Nobody's going to bother you about Mars. And I was like, fuck Mars. Nobody cares about Mars. I don't fucking give a shit about fucking Mars. So stupid. Send a robot to Mars. Come on. We don't need people. I don't care. I don't care. Like, the most important thing in storytelling, I would argue, and you can argue back or you can agree with me, is make me care, right? Or make me fucking care. Number one.
Yes.
I do not care about Mars. I don't care. I'll look up in the sky. I can see the planet. It's red. It's cool. I track it, but I don't fucking care. I care about Earth. Earth is here. This is where we live. It's very nice here.
Exactly.
It's got all kinds of water. It's got plants and animals and gravity and atmosphere and like all the things that we need. Maybe we'll do a whole episode if you want on why going to Mars is so fucking stupid. I did a very short TikTok on it that got 2.5 million views.
At the end of my last book, I talk about why humans should not be colonizing as human beings in human bodies space, and why we have to send artificial intelligence. And yeah, it's stupid. You don't want to do it.
We can talk about it. I mean, that should be a whole episode for sure. So yeah, so I left, and I was one of the only people, or one of the few people, who wanted to stand up against Trump and push back. And so many people cowered. Yeah. They, it was like, lay low, keep your head down and lay low. And I'm not a lay low, keep your head down kind of a person. If you know me for like 5 minutes, I'm not fucking laying low or keeping my head down. I'm like, yeah, let's go forward. So that's my personality. And that's one of the reasons our website, climate.nasa.gov, that no longer exists anymore. And there's not even a record of it. It was totally removed from all the government websites recently. very recently. It was very popular. One of the reasons why was because I was like, let's do this, let's put this forward, let's go. And I mean, and then I'm not going to turn on a dime from like really trying to make a difference to like laying low and cowering. There were people who were like, I've had breast cancer twice, I can't lose my insurance, I have to lay low. And then other people, my direct manager said to me, don't you want your name associated with NASA? Then that was the last time I spoke to him, which I was like, no. But then it also showed that he didn't know me. He was projection.
He was projecting,
exactly.
Right?
Definition of projection. So
because that's why he stayed.
Exactly. So there are people who are desperate to have their name associated with some brand. But I want to believe that I had more integrity, but I also had privilege in the sense of like, if I didn't believe that I could find a way through, if I absolutely thought that I'd be destitute without that job or needed the health insurance. But I don't know. Everybody has their own reason for why they decided that it was okay to lay low and cower. And I could not do it. I just could not. So I wrote a book about what happened and why I think I even put up with the intimidation for as long as I did. And why I didn't push back even more and push back harder, having to do with, a lot of the just systemic belief systems that I allowed society to tell me about who I was as a human based on the way I present and the way I look and my personality, that, perhaps like because I swear or because I look cute or because I, don't wear a business suit, that, something about me isn't legitimate enough for the world. But the older I get, the more I want to push against that stuff and be as fully wild as I naturally am, and that's pretty wild.
What? If you watch your TikTok, you'll understand why she just meowed.
I don't know.
But this is exactly why we're doing this podcast together, because you just, in very short order, in that last bit, knocked down about 3 or 4 myths. These are all myths that need to be.
Do you want to say what they are? Because I'm knocking down myths and I don't even notice I'm knocking them down.
The appearance myth, the go along to get along myth, how institutions work versus how they should work.
Well, let me just add to that one. So basically the government and the people in power at NASA used the bureaucracy to slow things down. So for example, I was in Greenland allegedly reporting on ice mask law. So this was the second time I was in Greenland. The first time I was in Greenland, Obama was president at that time. And I was publishing and posting and sharing all kinds of information across every social media and on the websites, right? And public speaking. The second time I went, Trump was in office, right? As a science person, you plan everything. You don't just like, oh, I'm going to book a ticket to Greenland. It had been planned a year in advance. So nobody stopped me. Everything was chaos, right? It was so chaos. So I go, right? But they put in this bureaucratic mechanism that every tweet, Facebook post, Instagram post, blog, video, photograph, everything that normally I'd have like a copy editor, right? Go over it, and then it would go live, right? If I was at a science conference and one of the researchers was presenting, I'd like live tweet the conference so that people could follow along in real time. That was like a normal thing, right? But they changed it. So every single everything had to be reviewed by a set of managers and then passed on to a set of people from media relations who could change it or approve it. Then it went back to a team of scientists who had to approve it. Then it went back to media relations again. So shit was just cycling around in review forever and never went live. So it was a way for them to use the mechanism of bureaucracy to actually censor. That was that myth of how institutions are supposed to work smoothly. But, if somebody in power wants to gum up the works, they certainly can. And they do. And I'm 100% certain this is what's happening and worse in our governmental institutions
no question.
right now.
No question. And the final myth is that you can't be a whole person and be a scientist or
be an anythingist. I think can't we be who we are? Why can't we be who we are? And I think the more people are who they are, first of all, you'll be happier as a human.
Amen.
And second of all, I think the world wants to welcome whole people. And I mean, if anything is proof of concept. The TikTok channel, and TikTok has been strange for me. I mean, I started it in deep pandemic, I think in 2022, and just as a lark. I just wanted to make some stuff, and like the third video got 5.5 million views. So I was like, oh, this could be interesting. So I just kind of kept at it. But, when that whole thing, when they were going to shut it down and then it's changed. Yep. And I mean, I think as a creator, a content creator, and I'll say this for other content creators too, because I see this going on. It's like a lot of the people who I was originally interacting with on various platforms, they go away. Maybe they take a break. Maybe they move on to something else. So,
That's
I know that people have like media breaks as consumers, but also as creators. Not only do you take a break, you got to read the room. I mean, right now, dancing around in my garden talking about planting peas, it just kind of doesn't feel right. So I've been talking more straight to camera, less frivolous stuff, more like get real shit. I did some stuff about like, since we're cutting every fund for education, let's teach you a little bit about oceanography. I don't know how much it'll help you, but it's something, at least you could get some kind of education. So I'm open to figuring out what's next for any of the platforms that I work with. And I think for me that was, when you first said, can you, would you like to co-host this show with me? And there's many reasons I said yes, but one of the reasons I'm interested in and continue to be interested in doing it is because I think exploring how different platforms work is interesting.
Yes.
I'm very interested in media and social media and the connections that we make through our media, and this is one way to do it and one way to interact. So I do hope that, like when I did the blog for NASA, I literally every single person who wrote in or commented, I gave them a response, every single one. And I feel the same way about this. Anybody who wants to, write in or comment on the podcast, I want to hear what you're interested in, what you want to talk about, what you want to learn about, how you want to interact. We're here for each other, but we're also here for you. And please, if I'm ever a condescending ass, call me out. I have an anathema toward condescension. So call my ass out.
Well, I absolutely agree. The final thing I just want to say to your point is that we're going to have a lot of guests on the show, many of whom I met through social media or through their media, and how either they reached out to me, I reached out to them, and we are now real life friends. And that's an extraordinary thing that did not exist when Laura and I were young.
A couple of people in real life that I met on the internet, like dating in the DMs, there's a lot of people who DM me and they're like, let me give you money or show you my dick. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about like actual people who you want to meet in real life.
Oh my God.
So many propositions. So many people want. If I said yes to everybody who asked me to marry them, I would have like 200 spouses.
Oh my God. That's so crazy. Oh my God.
Maybe I should have 200 spouses and see what that's like.
On that note, I want to thank Laura Faye Tenenbaum for not only being a guest extraordinaire, but for being my co-host, our co-host on this podcast. And I am extremely excited about where we're going to go together with this show and all the people we're going to meet along the way, the friendships, the connections, and the growth and learning we're all going to have. And I hope you join us because it's going to be a lot of fun.
I am so grateful to be on this ride with you specifically, not just with any old random post, but with you specifically. This is very good for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you to everyone. And we will see you again soon.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.